Hello, everybody, and welcome back to On the Victory Homefront. I am your host, Jamie, and today's podcast is actually influenced by something that we are currently finding ourselves in, which we are currently finding ourselves in a conflict with another country. And so this kind of really had me starting to think of a certain aspect when it comes to conflict with a country in that part of the world, and that is energy and gasoline. Because right away when I saw we were in a conflict, I wanted to go to the gas pump and I wanted to fill my car up with gas because, of course, I'm thinking, okay, gas prices are going to jump. Now, did you know in World War II, gasoline was rationed, but not for the reason you may think. And so that is the inspiration of today's podcast. So when conflict erupts somewhere in the world, an oil infrastructure is threatened, Americans start watching the gas pump. Prices move, analysts speculate, and people calculate what it's going to cost to fill up next week. Because energy touches nearly every part of modern life. So when it feels uncertain, even how briefly it could be, it gets our attention. But this is not the first time that war or conflict has reached into the American driveway. Because during World War II, Americans didn't just face higher gas prices, they were told how much gasoline they could buy. They were issued ration books. They had classification stickers placed on their windshields, and they were ordered to slow down to 35 miles per hour. It was called victory speed. So today, I want to explore that moment because conflict and war doesn't just test armies. It tests civilians. It tests the home front. Now, there's a common myth that gasoline rationing in World War II happened because America ran out of oil. It didn't. Can you believe that the United States was the world's largest oil producer at that time? And it was producing roughly 60 to 65% of the world's supply during the war. It was a dominance that would last until the early 1970s. And production remained strong throughout World War II. So why did we ration it? Well, we're going to get into a little bit of a timeline that's really going to explain all that. And this is actually where a lot of people, understandably, get it wrong, even myself. So gasoline rationing didn't just begin nationwide. It began regionally. In January of 1942, so just weeks after Pearl Harbor, German submarines launched an aggressive campaign along the American coastline, and it was called Operation Drum Beat. So U-boats began sinking merchant ships and oil tankers within sight of shore. Coastal cities could see burning ships at night, and the East Coast at that time depended heavily on tanker shipments from Gulf Coast refineries. There were limited pipeline connections at that time, and so when tankers started going down, distribution became vulnerable. So the issue wasn't oil production, it was transportation. By spring of 1942, the federal government recognized that fuel delivery to the eastern seaboard was under serious strain. So in May of 1942, gasoline rationing was imposed, but only in the eastern states and Washington, D.C. that covered 17 states. They were the first 17 that were affected. It was not affected anywhere else in the country. And this was a direct response to the submarine warfare, the U-boats. So it wasn't until later that year, later in 1942, that rationing became national. And that brings us to the second crisis. So while submarines were attacking shipping lanes in the Atlantic, Japan had swept through Southeast Asia, and by early 1942, Allies lost access to roughly 90% of the world's natural rubber supply. 90%. Rubber was essential to modern warfare. It was tires for Jeeps and trucks. It was for aircraft components, industrial seals. The War Production Board declared rubber a critical wartime material in 1942. And here's a line that surprises people. The Office of Price Administration stated plainly, gasoline rationing is not designed to save gasoline. It is designed to save rubber. The government wasn't worried about us running out of fuel. The government was worried about tire wear. Every unnecessary mile driven by a civilian shortened the life of tires needed for military transport. Period. So on December 1st, 1942, gasoline rationing became nationwide, and more than 30 million ration books were distributed. The policy evolved as the crisis deepened. First came the transportation emergency caused by the U-boats, and then came the material emergency caused by rubber shortages. And finally, a structured national conservation system. So war policy doesn't happen all at once. And it didn't happen all at once for World War II. It unfolded in layers. Now, every vehicle displayed a windshield sticker. If you were even lucky to have a vehicle, because that's another discussion. But if you did have a car, you would have a windshield sticker, and most Americans received an A sticker, which only allowed a few gallons of gasoline per week. Essential workers qualified for B or C classification. Now that included war workers, it included farmers, it included clergymen, and it also included government officials. But here's how that worked. So you could have money in your pocket, you could pull up to a gas pump, but without proper coupon, you were not getting fuel. Access was controlled. That's fundamentally different from simply paying a higher price like today. And then came something even more striking. The entire nation was told to slow down. In 1942, Office of Defense Transportation. There was a lot of offices in World War II. So the Office of Defense Transportation established a nationwide maximum speed limit of 35 miles per hour. Now, I don't personally know how fast a vehicle could go back then. I mean, you watch the 1930s films and they're just speeding around corners like you wouldn't believe. Now, obviously that's fake, but back then, 1942, all speed limits everywhere was brought down to 35 miles per hour. That was your maximum speed, and it was branded as victory speed. The reasoning was pretty straightforward. At higher speeds, tires wear out dramatically faster. Fuel efficiency declines and mechanical strain increases. So slowing down the traffic to 35 miles per hour conserved rubber and gasoline simultaneously. So today, most of our American highways are posted at 70 to 75 miles per hour. So can you imagine tomorrow that every interstate in the country drops to 35? Not for construction, not for emissions, but because the nation is at war and tire wear must be reduced. That was the reality in 1942. And public messaging reinforced it. One wartime slogan declared, "When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler," because carpooling became patriotic and leisure driving was discouraged. President Franklin Roosevelt reinforced this broader mindset in a 1942 fireside chat. "We are all in this war. We are all in it, all the way. Every single man, woman, and child is a partner." And there was more to that quote, but that's all I'm going to say. So that mattered. That framing mattered. It connected inconvenience to victory. Gasoline rationing wasn't isolated because there was also sugar rationing, there was meat rationing, there was coffee rationing. I'm literally drinking my mix of coffee and chicory root. There were scrap drives and victory gardens and war bonds. So one slogan from the time really summed it up: do with less, so they'll have enough. And they are our soldiers. The message was consistent. Your restraint supports the troops. Americans didn't enjoy rationing, but many accepted it because it was framed as participation in something larger. Inconvenience became contribution. That's a powerful cultural difference. Today, when energy markets tighten, we usually experience it through price. Supply remains available, but the cost fluctuates. So during World War II, price controls limited inflation. The lever wasn't cost, it was limitation. You were allowed only so much. Different system, same reality, war reshapes daily life. But here is the deeper question, and it's not political, it's not cultural. Could we do it again? Could we accept ration books? Something I'm going to talk about in another podcast. Would we tolerate windshield classifications? Getting that letter put on your windshield of how much gas you're allowed each week. Would we slow every interstate to 35 miles per hour if national security required it? Would the Americans be all right with that? See, World War II Americans believed their smaller sacrifices were directly connected to battlefield success. They believed slowing down mattered. That belief made compliance possible. Do you think we as a nation now would share that same belief? Energy is more than fuel. It is mobility, it is commerce, it is freedom of movement. When it becomes uncertain, we're reminded how dependent we are on it. In 1942, Americans adjusted to a world where gasoline, rubber, and even speed itself was subordinated to victory. They slowed down. They carried their ration books. They accepted the limits because they believed the cause justified the cost. War tests nations in many ways. Sometimes it tests their armies, sometimes it tests their patience, and sometimes it tests whether you are willing to drive 35 miles per hour. I would love to hear your insights on the questions that I asked a moment ago. Do you think our nation would be able or willing to make the sacrifices that our greatest generation did should a crisis require it? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments here on this episode. I do ask that you please be kind with each other. I do know that this kind of discussion can have very passionate replies, and we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences. We all have different opinions that were formed by our personal experiences or things that we have seen, we have felt. So let's just be kind to each other. The questions are, can we as a nation of today do the same things that our society, our greatest generation did during World War II? So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and I would really appreciate if you wouldn't mind sharing with somebody who you think would enjoy this kind of content to help this podcast grow. Until next time, everybody, stay positive, be kind, and remember that victory is in the everyday.